du das so machen, dass das noch eine Sekunde kommt?
Nein, kann ich nicht. Du machst irgendwo in der Nähe, die Lisa hat ein Mikrofon, das andere. Ich werde irgendwo da sein und das gibst du mir dann.
Ich setze mir.
Oder du kannst du behalten und ich nehme es mir dann von dir, das gibt
Krieg's einfach.
Und das andere hat diesen. Ansonsten technisch haben wir das Bild hier, das haben wir, aber sonst jetzt nichts weiter. Jetzt ein Video oder irgendwas. Ja, doch, Video haben wir auch. Aber das ist das später, vergiss es. Okay, wir sind alles.
I'm sure you're getting good feedback.
Bitte? Me, 3 years ago, if I was to become a general chair of hypertext, I would not invite a politician, right? It's a scientific conference, so why would I want to invite a politician to this conference? 3 years later, I am general co-chair of this conference, and now we have a politician among us. So let me mention a few words how this came into place. When we applied to host this conference this year, we knew that it would be a 30th anniversary conference. And we were looking for a motto for this conference. And it was obvious that we could use the fall of the Berlin Wall as a motto for the conference, tear down the wall. At the scientific side, we also want to break down walls. We want to communicate to other research communities. We want to enlarge our own community, our hypertext community, to reach out to people who do work in the field, but coming from other research areas. So we want to break down the wall in our head, in our community. Based on this motto, we outlined the whole conference, starting from our exhibition, and a special thanks to our curator, Dini Grigar. The exhibition, which is based on this motto, tear down the wall, the social events we had, for example, the guided tour through Hof, a city which is very close to the inner German border, to the former inner German border, I must say, to our visit, our social event in Mödlerreuth, where we experienced the physical wall. And we did this to foster communication of what it means to build up walls or to tear them down. Unfortunately, we live in a time in which worldwide walls are meant to be built. People want to build walls instead of tearing them down. So this approach we had for this conference, this approach of extending our communities, inviting other people to our other scientists to our conference, is something which was which could have been which was experienced on different levels to ensure people take away from this conference that we must unite, we have to work together in order to solve the problems we have, also on different levels. So it's a pleasure for me to welcome Manfred Weber, good friend of mine. We know each other since second grade, I think. At school, right? We have played in a band for several years. He was the guitar, I was the bass player. He is leader of the European People's Party, so he is one of the personalities in European politics. And the reason why I invited him was not so much that we know each other, certainly the communication is easier that way, but the actual reason was that I know Manfred as a person who builds bridges and tears down walls instead of building them. So he is in this scope of experiences, what walls mean for our lives and also for the conference and also for scientists. In his Keynote publication he writes, if we want to preserve our huge achievements, we must also break down the walls in other areas or prevent new walls from being built. So thanks a lot, Manfred, for being with us and talking about what it means to tear down walls, talk about the European way of life, and inspiring us to take this as some ideas from this conference. So thank you a lot, and now I would like to hand over the microphone to you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Klaus, Mr. President, colleagues from the advisory board of the university, welcome here in Bavaria, because I'm also a Bavarian. That's why it's great to have you here, to have the world here in Hof, here in the north of Bavaria. I hope you enjoyed the days here and you also experienced a little bit the Bavarian way of life before we come to the European way of life. Probably I should introduce, first of all, myself and in a little bit more detailed way. Klaus told you that I'm leader of the European People's Party. The European People's Party is the center-right movement. You have traditionally in all the countries all over the world, in all political sceneries, you have center-right and the left parties. We are the Christian Democrats, the center-right party here in Europe. So, for example, Angela Merkel, the Chancellor of Germany, is part of the movement of the European People's Party. And we are the biggest political faction inside of the European Parliament. The European Parliament represents nearly 500 million citizens of the European Union. We had elections this year, so in May this year there were European elections. More than 50% of people participated in the European elections. More than 200 million people participated in the European elections this year. It's the second biggest democracy in Europe. The Indians are the biggest one, and Europe, when you vote for the European Parliament, is the second biggest one. And my group again, I'm chairing the group in the European Parliament. I'm the speaker of the group. We are again the biggest group, the biggest faction inside of the Parliament. 40 million people voted for the European People's Party in the last elections. And I have the honor to chair this group. Today we have 186 members from 27 member states composing the European People's Party of today. And in the Socialist Party, it's the same. And you can already imagine when I tell you this, having in mind, we speak about Latvia, we speak about Portugal, about Greece, about Germany, Ireland, speak about the countries of the European Union of today. You can imagine that already this job description to chair such a group, 186 colleagues out of 27 member states, So I have no British colleague inside, I have to tell you. The Brexit happened already in my group, so the Tories already left years ago, my party. You can imagine when I describe you the political job I have, that this already includes the idea to tear down walls, to bridge things, to bring people together. And that is my role as a politician, to bring things together, to combine things, to make compromises. And that's why I'm grateful that I can be part of this conference. The final speaker, hopefully you have still enough energy for the last hour of this conference. It's great to be here. Klaus told you already that we know each other for a long time. We played together in a rock band, we played weddings, and a lot of future couples made their first common dancing steps on our songs. So that was a great experience, and we are really very good friends. So it's great to be here and also support his idea to do the conference here in Bavaria, here in Hof. Let me underline that when Klaus is referring that it is not usual to invite to such a conference a politician, then I must tell you that I believe that this is already the first step of tearing down walls. What do I mean? I think that we are living today in a society where the different parts of our societies are working and developing and improving in their boxes. So the scientific field, universities, churches, religion, communities, politics, they are doing their business in their parliament, business sector, CEOs, global developments, business and so on. And we are losing a little bit the connections between each other. So to listen to each other, what are your experiences? What do you think? What is needed to regulate, to do? And what do you have to understand? What are the constraints and the problems of a politician when he is doing his job? That's why I personally, I'm happy that we are also communicating among each other, that we are having, at least as a final contribution, also, let me say, this dialogue. To tear down walls, one possibility is, as we spoke already, I spoke already about music, about doing music. I think culture and music is for sure one of the elements to tear down walls. Another element to do so is for sure politics. When we refer to the 13th anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall, the inhuman Iron Curtain in the European Union of today, then for sure one of the elements to tear down walls is for sure politics. I have still in mind the sequence, the video sequence of John F. Kennedy's speech in Berlin, 1963. Ich bin ein Berliner, and please, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. And having the fascinating idea from Helmut Kohl and François Mitterrand, two great leaders of political leaders of Europe, Germany and France especially, who had the great idea for a strengthening of the European Union to create a Europe which is so united like it is today. And mainly when I talk about politics and about this event 30 years ago, mainly not to talk about politicians, but about civil society. What do I mean? The event that we had now, the unified Europe, the starting point of this was not due to politicians. It was due to people, to people's activities. Thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people went out in the street in Poland, in Hungary, in the former so-called democratic Republic of Germany, and they showed their face. They fought for freedom, for a unified Europe. And I tell you, one of my vice presidents in my group is from Latvia. The name Sandra Kalniete. She's 65 years old, and she was born in the former Soviet Union. She was born in a gulag, in a concentration camp in the east of the Soviet Union, because the Latvians were not allowed to live freely in the Soviet Union. And then she came back, she made her studies in Latvia, she grew up in the Soviet Union, and then in 1988, 1989, she went out to demonstrations. She stood up and she fought for their freedom, for an independent Latvia, for a country, for also her country. They made demonstrations along all the coast of the Baltic states. Millions of people went out. And finally, they got it. They got the independence. They got the freedom. And today, she's member of a free elected European Parliament. An unbelievable development. And such people created this development. That is important to understand. That's a key element of these developments, is the development inside of civil societies. Probably a third element of tearing down walls is for sure your field. So science has also a great impact. When we are celebrating this year the 13 years of the internet, then we can refer to the situation that 30 years ago when I was young and I had to do, that wasn't the case, but if I would have had to do a telephone call to America, the costs are enormous. That everybody knows this. Today, I switch on my mobile phone and I have connection to the whole world for not a lot of costs. So that is what science, what innovation brings, and what is connecting people. And that is the contribution of science. Let me, as a second element, first of all, who is creating this movement to tear down walls? Let me secondly speak about this. First of all, I have to clarify, this is me, okay? Sorry, I forgot it, but it's a summer outcome. You know, my wife is fine with it, and that's why I'm testing it for the moment. So let's see how long it will stay. Let me talk about the European way of life. You know, for me, the European way of life, the fundament of the European way of life, is exactly what your title of the conference is all about. The tearing down of walls is the European way of life, bringing people together. 28 member states are today living in this free European Union and having a common fundament behind. The European Union of today, the European way of life, is built on fundamental principles: democracy, rule of law, the independence of a judiciary, the question that we have an equal treatment of men and women, the idea that tolerance is the fundament of our societies for all kinds of living together, whether you are an homosexual or whatever you try to live or you want to live, it's allowed, it's welcomed. That is the fundament of tolerance of an open society. The idea of creating peace. You know, we as Europeans, we went through terrible wars. The First, the Second World War, we had over centuries only wars in Europe. And since 17 years, we understood that it's better to build up bridges, to work together. And this innovation, let me say, this innovation for a society, not to split societies, not to split people, but to bring them together, that is needed in today's world. I give you an example, a political example. We are absolutely worried what is going on in the Middle East for the moment. We as Europeans, we tried to make a deal, a treaty with the Iran regime, not at all a good regime, don't get me wrong, but with the Iran regime to avoid that they get access to nuclear weapons. That is what we try to do, with the method of diplomacy, with the method of treaty, and not with the method of sending troops. That is what we try to do in all our efforts as Europeans on global stage, because we learned it. And I would also add to the European way of life the understanding that we have to find a way to bring the economic strengths together with the environmental responsibility, the ecological challenges of today. On the climate front, you know, today we have a big demonstration day globally, all over the world. It started in Australia, now in New York. I think the biggest demonstration is in New York. And all over the world, people are going out in the streets and fight for a climate-friendly economy. And having this in mind, I must tell you that the Paris Agreement, that we are forced and we are committed to reduce the CO2 emissions. And we guarantee that at the end of this century, we have not more than 2 degrees Celsius increase of the average temperature. To have this commitment was only possible to the concrete engagement of the Europeans. Without the Europeans, it would have been not possible. And these are the things which I would describe as the European way of life. Some of you from a global perspective would say, okay, but this is a development we have in a lot of regions in the world. But let me add a few other things. For example, the question of an economy which is socially fair. You can go to Romania. It's a poor country in Europe. It's a poor member of the European Union. But you will find in Romania a solidarity-based healthcare system. And in the United States, frankly speaking, you speak currently again about the big innovation of a healthcare system, Obamacare and so on. So for us as Europeans, it's totally clear that healthcare has a fundament in a solidarity manner to organize it in this way. That is what we understood. And let me give you a final example for what we understood. What is the European way of life? For us as Europeans, it's unthinkable that we are discussing and we are reintroducing death penalty in today's European Union. A fundamental issue. In Turkey, we have such a discussion whether they can reintroduce again death penalty. And if they would do so, then an access to the European Union would be impossible for us, because that is our common understanding. So allow me to show you what we understand as the European way of life. And this is not in any way a method to hopefully be not seen as an arrogant European that we are describing these things. But we want, on the other side, to show what we believe in and what we want to present to the world. In a period of Donald Trump, probably even more necessary than ever before. Let me say it in this way. There are some considerations and some ideas to the question of the European way of life. And one element makes me very sad, the ongoing debate about Brexit. You can imagine, and then one country decided to leave our union, to leave what we believe in. And you can exactly see what is happening now. We are building up walls again. Economically, for our business, it's a disaster. Today we have a single market in Europe, common standards, regulatory framework for all the companies. And in tomorrow's world, Great Britain will do again separate regulation, building up walls for business, building up walls for students. We have Erasmus in Europe, where European students can go for 1 year to another university in Europe to understand the other culture, the other perspective from another point of view. In the future, you cannot anymore go to London, you cannot anymore go to Cambridge, because it's not anymore part of the European Union, it cannot be financed anymore. And there are a lot of other issues. The most difficult one probably is the Northern Ireland border, which we are discussing currently extremely intensively. This week in the European Parliament, there was a big debate on this. The beginning of the week, Johnson and Jean-Claude Juncker, the current Commission President, met in Luxembourg, and we spoke about this. And you can imagine that we are extremely worried that the civil war and violence is coming back to Northern Ireland. And the development that Ireland and Great Britain were part of the European Union created the fundament, created the base for the peace process, for finally arriving to the Good Friday Agreement, which created now a good perspective for the people there. And we are going back now in history. We are building up border control and walls again. And that's why you can immediately see what European Union, what European way of life, what this in practical terms means. Let me finally give you a third observation. The first one was the elements who can tear down walls. The second element is about the European way of life, and the third element about the risk for tomorrow's walls. 150 years ago, when we saw the Industrial Revolution going on, 200 years, 150 years ago, the politicians, the society was not creative enough to overcome the negative impacts of the Industrial Revolution. Especially the social question was not answered. And the outcome politically for the society was then communism and the radical form of communism. That was the outcome then finally. And you can also call it totalitarianism what was the outcome. I must tell you that today we are in a similar situation. Today we have digitalization. Your field, you are the experts in this, which is already creating a revolution and will continuously create a revolution. Additionally, in such a speed that a lot of people are not sure whether they can understand everything what is going on. The speed is enormous. You know this better than me. And I tell you that I think that if we are not ready as politicians and as a society, together with you as the experts, that we can give proper answer about these developments, then we are risking also developments which are not good for our societies. The social question is back. We have now today a situation that young software developers become multi-billionaires in a few months, years, if they have a good idea. The big internet giants are dominating markets. So the question of a new, fair, social, digital economy is at stake. I think that Europe has an important role in this. I think that we need regulation, legislative rules for the new world we will live in. That means we have to talk about fair taxation in this field. And I see what Amazon and Google and others are paying as taxes here in the European Union, then I must tell you, I cannot explain this to ordinary citizens anymore. Or the normal traditional business like car manufacturing are paying as taxes, are contributing to a fair society, and what the digital field is contributing. That is not fair. That is not acceptable. And we need new tools, new elements, new kind of taxation for making a fair deal for tomorrow possible. I give you another example for regulation. We have to fight against monopolies. When I speak about Google, again, you are the experts. Please give me advice on this. But I think we need regulation. I think there are a few companies already too strong, too dominating for the future world. When data are the key currency for tomorrow, then we need a kind of a regulation. When data only are in one hand today. Another element is for me that we need rules to implement what we find in the real world as important values, to implement them also in the digital world. What do I mean? When you read today a newspaper, when you do hundreds of copies of an article which you like and you sell it or you distribute the article, then this is forbidden because there is a copyright behind. You have a journalist who has to be paid by the publisher. So that is the principle of copyright. Or when I would be so creative to produce a real Manfred Weber song, you see, then you know, I have real talent. We are good musicians, but not enough for real doing a good career. That's why he's professor and I'm a politician. No, but if I would be so creative, and I would have such a song, when you hear it, you will feel emotions. I think such a creative work as a musician must be protected. It's my song. It's my song. And this is not the situation in today's digital world. So copyright. We had a tough fight in the last month in the European public discussion whether we can implement copyright, which is an absolutely accepted rule inside of a real world, to implement this also in the digital world. Very difficult, but I believe we have to do so, because otherwise we risk to lose creativity. Those who are creative must be also protected with their creativity. That are the elements we have to talk about to avoid that the digital development will end up in a similar situation like we had it with industrialization. I give you a second element where I see a risk of new wars. And that is a split inside of a society. There are different possibilities to describe it, but let me simplify it with the message of rural areas versus cities. We have it all over the world. We have it with the yellow vests in France. We have it with the Trump effect in America. We have it in the east of Europe. I tell you, we have a big brain drain in Europe, that in poorer countries like Bulgaria, for example, young people, they have good schools there, but when they go to university, when they are looking for a job, they go to the West. So a lot of young people are leaving the Central Eastern European countries and going to the West because they can earn much more money. And And these developments of rural areas versus the developments in the cities, there is a risk of a split of our societies. There is an obvious risk of our split of our societies in losers and winners of globalization, digitalization, and so on. We have to work with this, and that means also for us as politicians, again, investment in rural areas. We have to assist those who have more problems to adapt, to connect to the modern world, to the world of tomorrow. For you, it's easy to do so. You are on a global level, you're working every day in such a format, but a lot of people, and you know this from your home region, have not the capacity, have not the will probably even to do so, and we should not lose the connection to this part of the society. And another point where I see the risk of additional, let me say, additional walls is for sure the question of migration. I tell you that we try to do our best to implement also in the field of migration the European way of life. And that means not building up walls like Donald Trump, like the Australians. I don't know whether somebody from Australia is here, to looking for an island where you can send all the illegals there. That is not the European way of life. To find a balance between, yes, there is a need of border protection. Yes, obviously, you need a passport to cross a border all over the world. You cannot have an uncontrolled migration. That's understandable. But to do this in a human way, to do this in a way where we respect each and every human being. For us, the biggest challenge is to save life in the Mediterranean Sea. That is our biggest challenge as Europeans. And finally, probably as an element where we have additional walls probably ahead of us is the whole economic fields, the trading policy, which is crucial for the economic development on global level. The last 16, 17 years after the Second World War, the western part of the global level always tried to improve trade among us. And that created a lot of connections between people. When you do trade, you speak to each other, you listen to each other. That helped a lot to overcome them problems, political problems. I must tell you that with the newest developments, we are building up again walls. Again, Donald Trump is one of the sources for this development. We as Europeans, we are ready for building up bridges. We did it with Canadians, with the CETA agreement. We did it with the Japanese. So we have an agreement with Japan on free trade agreement. We did it with Mercosur, so with the whole South American region. And we are fighting for this. And hopefully we can continue this. So fair, free trade agreements, that is what we need. And let me add only one element, because CO2 and climate change is such a decisive issue for the next upcoming decade and whole century. Let me add that if we as Europeans go further with reducing climate emissions, then we have to consider also to make some kind of CO2 tariffs on our external border, because we cannot allow that America or China are doing a kind of an ecological dumping in the field of economy. We have to protect also our industries when we create more pressure for them in reducing CO2. That are the elements for the future where I see the risks for creating new walls. And that's why I think your title, your general idea, what you have to do in your community to expand this really to the society, to expand this to the idea what digitalization means for society, what we have to do, what you as community have to do to find a way to not create any kind of wall, is exactly the right title. So 30 years after the fall of the Berlin Wall, I think the message of today is again that the last years were great years. We worked together, we found a lot of friends abroad, and we should keep this spirit for the upcoming decade as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for your keynote speech at the Hyperdesk conference. Before we come to questions, I would like to give you a small present for accepting our offer basically to speak at our conference. And we were thinking about what can we give a politician who basically most of the time receives some wine and whiskey and something to eat. So we didn't want to have that, but we will present you with something I guess you have never received from this conference, our 30th anniversary T-shirt. So I really hope I will see this on you next time I see you at home. So,
at home I can promise, but not in the next speech in the European Parliament. So that's not possible. So thank you so much.
So now, thank you. So now we are up to questions. I ask you to speak into the microphone because we are live streaming and we are also recording this session. Okay.
Thank you very much for your talk and for everything you're doing for a united Europe. We're all, of course, concerned about the UK as well. As hypertext theorists, we have long had a notion of what we call transclusion, of where one document appears within another document. And so as you're implementing the link tax that's part of the copyright scheme, it's important to remember that the people, that the users, as you say, it's that revolutions begin with the people and move up. Make sure that we're targeting the Googles and the Microsofts, and that the people who are sharing information don't get hurt by that link tax.
Directly, or do you want to collect? I do. Yes, thank you so much. And one of the principles, I think, what we have to understand is that some fundamental rights are fundamental rights, are fundamental principles. But when we speak about, let me say, the concrete implementation, and taxation is a concrete implementation, then I think we have to be creative. And you are right. I think we need really regulation, especially on European level. You know, Europe is united, but Europe is extremely diverse. And that's why when we do European legislation, we should do it for the big giants. That is our job. And therefore, Europe is strong in us. We are the strongest economy on this world. Huh? Let me tell you, though, we have, from a trading point of view, we have the capacity to do so. And when you talk about money, about capacity to invest, Europe is even stronger than the Americans are. That's why we have a lot of capacity. If we do so, we can set the rules for tomorrow's world, but to do it in a clever way, allow innovation for the small, medium enterprises, companies, but regulate for the big ones.
Thank you very much for your talk. I'm from the US, and I want you to give me some hope. I think politicians should give us hope. I think that's one of the main things you can give us. So I'm going to ask you for some hope. But at the same time, when I look at Europe, I'm also seeing some concerns. You know, Hungary, the Law and Justice Party in Poland is a concern to me. Obviously, Brexit is on everyone's mind. So tell me that Europe can still stand and keep the US from going even further off the rails. Can Europe give the US hope right now for those of us who are really looking forward to the next election?
May you allow me, when you speak about the idea of hope, that yes, we politicians have always the opportunity, the honor to speak. We are in front of people. We have the podium in our hand. But finally, it's up to people. We are living in a democracy. And that's why when you ask me about hope, I tell you, I was running in the last year all over Europe in the European elections. I was speaking a lot. I was doing a lot of presentations. I tried to do a social media campaign for presenting our ideas as a party. Like, it's campaigning, presenting your ideas. And I tell you, when I see now the outcome of the European elections, then we have an increase of participation, around 50%, more than 50% in European elections. We have a strengthening of the center of the political landscape. So liberals, socialists, Greens, EPP, the Christian Democrats. So we are the democratic center. Those who are not only pro-Europeans, because you can also be critical to Europe, you can also say, no, I want to have power back to national level. That is a debate we have to do for which issues we need more Europe. But people supported the politicians who are in favor of the basic principle of democracy, and that is compromise, to be ready for compromise. They supported it. So the center was strengthened, having in mind Le Pen in France, #1, having in mind Salvini, Italy, having in mind Kaczynski, Poland, in Germany, AfD, and so on. Having this in mind, people stood up, went to the ballot boxes, and supported this idea of compromise. And that gives me personally, frankly speaking, so much motivation to continue, because people stood up. And that is exactly what we didn't saw, frankly speaking, in the Brexit case. Young generation. When I had to do my first speech after Brexit happened, I stood in the European Parliament on my place, first row as a group leader, and I said it was great to see that so many great British youngsters, young people, were against Brexit, but they didn't participate in the referendum. The turnout was a catastrophe. And that's why, yes, I have a special responsibility. My community as politicians have a special responsibility, but for me it's extremely important. What I said also for the Berlin Wall question, society, we together, we have to be active. And that is what the Americans have to do. You know this better than anyone else. So to stand up and to fight for what we believe in. And finally, I think the general direction is a positive one. We learn out of history, and we will have a good future if we are active.
Let me ask that question in a slightly less emotional way than Professor Wabrock did. I'm also an American, but I observed that of the 500 or so members of the government and the Congress and the Senate in the United States, probably fewer than 10% of them have any technology background. How would you assess the percentage of the 500 members of the European Parliament in terms of their technology backgrounds?
How do you define technology background?
Well, knowing something about technology and technology as it should affect policy, be driven by policy, sophisticated technology knowledge, not just superficial knowledge.
Okay.
What percentage of your members have any significant technology experience?
I have a mobile phone, dear friends. I have a mobile phone. I can tell
QED.
But, Klaus, do you allow me? Only, thank you for the question. And that is one of the aspects, I'm today invited in your Congress, and it's great for me to be here, to have this interaction. But tomorrow I will go to a healthcare conference. And when I'm next time in the Parliament, I will discuss about the legislation for exchange of police data for fight against terrorism. And the next day, I will do a speech on the question of how to manage Russia and the Ukraine point. I'm a politician. I'm sitting on my place, and I have to vote on every legislation which has an impact to our societies. So the role of a politician is, frankly speaking, not to be the expert. The job of the politician is to listen, to pick up, but then to try to find a balance among all the interests in our societies. That is the job of a politician. So a good politician is listening a lot, A good politician is observing and trying to understand everything. But I don't want to live in a world where only the experts who have only their field in mind are deciding about their field. You need this kind of understanding about all the parts of a society and then to bridge things in a democracy. Is this understandable? So okay, good.
The next question by Ethan.
So I'm also an American, but this is not an American-focused question. I'm curious what you think about the role, I think Brexit is a good example of this, about the current role and the proper long-term role for direct democracy in in systems like this. And I would also add that many of our concerns about social media and its use in some ways are really a reflection of direct democracy concerns. So I'm just curious where you see it fits, what its appropriate role is.
It's absolutely obvious that the people, the society today expect more involvement in the political process. In the past, you only had the elections, Germany or every 3 or 4 years, Europe every 5 years. And today, in a world where informations are so transparent, everybody knows everything. So in such a world, people are asking for more involvement, for being listened, being heard. On the other hand, the technological development, social media and so on, creates a lot of potential to emotionalize things in the current state of play. The Brexit happened in a period of time where we had the migration crisis. And Johnson and his supporters on the Brexiteers published leaflets in Great Britain where he said that the European Union is opening all the borders and the European Union is involving Turkey, Syria, and Iraq to the European Union, and all these people will come. So that was the campaigning of Johnson in the campaign. And you see, when you use such elements in such a complex question like Brexit, it's an extremely complex question, then I would say it's not easy to bring these 2 points together. I cannot say yes or no to direct democracy, because again, involvement is needed. But you, in your field, with the new technological possibilities we have in the future, we can together assess how we can integrate the will of people to participate, but finally have always a kind of a safeguard where a mechanism is behind. I can make exactly as a politician a kind of a balancing of an outcome of such a referendum. That is not yet the case. And if you allow me, one element which is in this Johnson case extremely worrisome is that he's telling now the public that he's defending the will of the people. 51% in an outcome of a referendum is not the will of the people, it's a majority of the people. Absolutely respect it. I regret the Brexit, but I respect the Brexit. But it's not the people of Britain. The people of Britain are represented in their House of Commons. The Parliament is a place where people are represented. The Lib Dems, the Greens, and whatever, they are represented. And that's why even to say, I defend the will of the people against the Parliament, that is today, let me say, the public debate in Great Britain is extremely worrisome, let me say it with careful words. So we have to be very, very alarmed about these developments. Finally, again, Parliament is a place to compromise between parties and structures and society, parts of the society.
Hi, my name is Dick Baltram and I live in Amsterdam. One of the things that we've been talking about are the threats to free and accurate information that technology poses, and also the commercial influence in steering the amount of information that people need because of the advertising and internal interests of technology giants such as Google and Facebook, so as you mentioned. But there are other threats to free information, such as is going on within your own coalition in the member state of Hungary. What can Europe do? But what can your own coalition do to ensure the basic right of the people to be informed, even if it's with news against the will of the government?
You know, Hungary is an extremely difficult and also worrisome development. My party, the European People's Party, decided to freeze and to suspend the membership of Fidesz, so the governing party in Hungary, in the party. We have in a few weeks our Congress in Zagreb, and there Viktor Orban is not invited. He will not have the right to speak. No Fidesz member will be there and will have a right to vote and will have the right to be elected. So that means suspension, so to exclude them from all the decision-making process inside of my party. Because having in mind that we have a clear breach of fundamental principles in Hungary is not acceptable for us. What I mean here in this conference, the idea to limit the fundamental principle of freedom of science is simply unacceptable. So you know the Central European University. I met President Ignatieff several times. We had a good exchange of views. I presented an idea to do together with the Technical University of Munich, so Professor Hermann and a very important American university, to provide a new system to guarantee American diplomas in Budapest. For the moment, it's not agreed with the Hungarian authorities, so I try to solve the problems. But again, fundamentally, it's clear that if they are not accepting the fundamental principles, they cannot be part of the EPP. And on the long run, the question of being member of the European Union is also on the table. You see, when we started an Article 7 procedure, so the heaviest, the strongest weapon we have as politicians in our hand to defend the principles, we as Parliament started this against Hungary. I voted as an EPP member in favor of Article 7. We did the same with Poland. And I have to tell you that, only to be clear, that Macron is a great statesman, a strong representative for a future positive-orientated Europe. But he is today together in one group, in the Liberal group, in the Renew group, together with Babiš from Czech Republic. And you know what is going on in Czech Republic about media intervention and buying newspapers and so on. And in Romania, socialists governing there, also with corruption, a lot of problems. We see old style of society versus the new style, transparency, anti-corrupt and so on. We have a lot of internal problems. So thank you for the questions. I can clarify. I can clarify that I am a proud European, but we have still a lot to do inside of our own European Union. And the basic principle is to defend the values. That is the basic principle. They're not negotiable.
Okay, thanks. So we have time for one last question. Christian?
Yeah, Christian Kohlschütter. I'm a European, I'm a German, I'm a Hof native, but I live in America now, in California. And maybe I have a very unique view over what's happening right now. And I'm really grateful that you mentioned so many important topics and you said you would listen. I hope it's a question, but it's also a comment. So one thing that I noted is when we try to tear down walls and build bridges instead, there might be some unintended consequences though. And I'm really curious about how you see it. My personal view is that what's happening right now in Europe is that we build up new walls, not between countries, but within our society. I think what's happening specifically with the copyright directive, and you mentioned it explicitly, I understand that there needs to be a way to pay people fairly for their works. That is absolutely uncontroversial. But I think what's going on there is we try to build a fortress around the existing business models. The publishers in Germany that are specifically seeing American companies as their enemies, even though they're competitors. What's happening with these unintended consequences is that what you call creatives, these are not creatives at the point anymore. They're established businesses. They're making money from existing ideas. The new creatives, the startups, the new thinkers, the people who are students from this university, just like me, who try to build up something, have a really hard time with the new regulations to build up something in Europe. It's much easier to do in California. We have fair use. We have the attempt to try out something. And I think that might be stifled by the new laws. So, Mr. Weber, think about the implications on what's happening and what you also voted for in the European Union. The new laws certainly need to be amended to prevent virtual monopolization. I think we have to make sure that Europe is able to compete with America. And I think this is not possible if we prevent people from trying out new. The new creators are the ones that are not lobbying, that are not speaking up in the public. This could be the students that are posting memes online and get sued for it. This could be the little startup guy. That was me, basically, that also got sued for just linking. I think the core of this conference is hypertext, is linkage between things. And I think we have together to find solutions that are not preventing us from moving further, from moving into next century as an open society and not as a feudal system where there's a few European companies that are ruling the European way of life.
Thank you so much. Yes. I think we can direct in a personal dialogue to start. Let me say the details, talk the details about the regulation. Let me add only one, because that is, again, that is entering into the field of party politics. You see, we have parties who were very critical on this. The Greens, for example, voted against the regulation with mainly the arguments you mentioned. And that is what a pluralistic society needs, and that's great to have this. So there are different opinions on the table, and finally we have a majority in the parliament. So, but that more general point of view you mentioned is extremely important also for your work in the future. Frankly speaking, I started with a debate that we are living in our boxes. We all in society, so churches, science, politics, business, and the interaction is not anymore so strong like it was in the past, because we are becoming more and more experts in our fields. And having this in mind, I tell you, very practically speaking, when we do such a regulation in the European Parliament, when we negotiate the wording of the article in the legislation, then I must tell you that it is a big problem for us that we are having next to us, on the door, on the corridor, in the restaurant in the evening. We have always the big players. So Google is everywhere. Huh? Google is everywhere. They are trying to influence legislation every day with all means, with all possibilities they have. And we have not so much activities from the free sector, let me say, from the creative sector, because you are dealing with your business. You have enough to do and there is no lobbyism in a way, positive lobbyism in a way, organized lobbyism. So if you can find ways to interact with the decision makers in a better way, it would be absolutely appreciated by us. We can only deal with those where we have contact. And I meet with Klaus and so on, on personal level now and so on. The first time in history we speak in English to each other, I have to tell you. But we meet each other, and you know that is what we try to do as a person, as a politician, as a person. But as a systemic approach, you have to find ways to bring your knowledge on the table of the decision makers, and that is a common, let me say, engagement necessary to do so. I think in the political sphere, a lot of colleagues from all parties would be happy to do so and try to be interactive. But finally, it's our role to decide. We have the responsibility. We have to show to the citizens, to all citizens, what we stand for, what we fight for. And then people decide whether this was good or not, whether they re-elect us or whether they will not re-elect us. So that is probably a more general remark to what you said.
And I appreciate this. I think still sometimes the best way to play is to not play. If you can't make a good law, sometimes it's better to not have one. I understand that there's a lot of discourse, and there have been like talks about how to phrase things. Just to finish this up, I think it needs to be amended. It is very, it creates uncertainty. They have to basically push the problems over to the judicial system, and we have to like make things happen. It's happening right now with the German Leistungsschutzrecht for other reasons. But I think your job is, me as a software engineer as well, it is not just to write code, but to remove code, to make it simpler, and sometimes to not write code, which could be weaponized. And that is like maybe the more fundamental thing. It's sometimes better to leave it to the market and see how it works, and very delicately change the existing system, rather than to too radically cater for the loudest audience, which is certainly not us.
Yeah. Klaus, last word. Thank you. Thank you for this. I have a different opinion, I tell you. I personally have a different opinion, because I tell you, 20 years ago, we had a socialist government in Germany, and they deregulated the financial market. German Deutsche Bank and so on. They deregulated the financial market with the idea that the whole business is done in New York, and we are having nothing of this big amount of business, and we want to have our share. That was the thinking in Germany, and they deregulated. And this was the base for the creation of the big financial crisis. Without regulation, a system cannot work. And I tell you, I personally, I'm not an expert at all, mobile phone, I'm not an expert at all, but I see a development ahead of us with the data and so on. It's the principle of data protection, data protection. There's a development going on where I think that we as Europeans have the duty to implement what we believe in. That data are private, are my data. Probably you say it's impossible in today's world to define my data. I say I don't care what is possible or not. I tell you, I'm a politician, I believe in principles, and I try to do my best to protect my data. And that's why I think we need regulation. And the Americans will not do so. The Chinese will do another way of regulation. And we as Europeans have a huge responsibility to create a framework for a sustainable market for tomorrow. I'm a friend of market. I'm a friend of competition. But you only can have a sustainable market, a long perspective sustainable market, if you have a good framework for this. And that is what we need in this field, hopefully with enough freedom for SMEs, because that is for enough creativity. That is what we need. So sorry for this.
Without turning this into a parliamentary debate, unintended consequences, well, I understand, is a bigger topic. It has, of course, unintended consequences. The GDPR, when I come to Germany and I open my web browser, the first thing I have to tap on is I agree that my cookies can be stored. This is yet another thing that makes, basically is a precedent for very, very unintended consequences. Before I could sue if somebody would take my data, and now I agreed on it. Basically, the new regulation took away my liberty to sue if the data was being misused. So you brought up a lot of interesting points, which are not very centric to Maritza point. That's why I have to comment again. But I think if there's one thing I can instill in you is think about the unintended consequences, and sometimes, even if you have to regulate, not to be too precise, and then in the end in the text be too imprecise,
Christian,
because that's what's happening.
Sorry
Thank you
to
very much
interrupt.
for your time.
I was announcing one question only. Now we all have three. Do you want to say a last word?
No.
That's fine. Okay.
No, it's fine. That is exactly what we need. That is exactly what we need.
Right.
Clear position and exchange of views, and then finally democratic votes.
I didn't mean to interrupt you with respect to the content, just with respect to the time. I have a question. I have the last one, right?
It's a privilege to have a microphone in his hand. Yeah?
I take the chance. So the question to you is, will you be back for us for sometime in the future?
Oh, God. Where do I have to go? You are coming back to Hof?
Possibly. So thanks a lot.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.